let's continue building out our blackjack game. So what we have right now is we can create different players, we can give them cards like we've done here. And we have this little loop that checks while the player has less than 21 cards. And while they do so, they keep getting asked for new cards. And if they take a new card, we give them a new card from the shuffled deck by using this .pop function, which removes the first card from the top of the deck. And we continue that until the player says they don't want any more cards or until they've gone over 21. And then we just kind of print out the house. So that's what we have right now. The next thing that we're going to want to implement is, well, first we need to check if the player has a blackjack, because that is very advantageous for them, and unless the house has a blackjack, they're going to get a big win. We're also going to need to continue to kind of put this into a bit more of a playable loop, so that you can't just play one round, but that you can kind of play over and over again. We also need to put in the ability to make bets beforehand. We're also going to need to automate the house's drawing of cards. Yeah, so that's what we're going to try to work on now. And so we'll start with the first thing that I mentioned, which is going to be defining a has blackjack method. That's going to be part of this player class, this one here. And what it's going to do is it's just going to allow us to check if the player or the house has a blackjack, so that we don't really need to code that out, and we can just make it part of this player class here that we have. Yeah, and so that just lets us check if they have a blackjack or not, and we can make some quick decisions based off of that. So let's start off, and we're going to call this method. So we're going to define the method using the def keyword, and we'll call it has blackjack, like this. Inside, we're going to need to put in our self, and that's all we're going to need to do. We don't need to put in any other parameters. We're going to use all of the internal parameters. So what are we going to do? Well, if it's a blackjack, just like here, so we've already kind of did a blackjack check. If the score is equal to 21 and the player has 2 cards in their hand, that means they have a blackjack. So if the self.score is equal to 21, so if your score is 21, or if the player's score is 21, and the length of the self.hand, so the length of their hand, so how many cards they have in their hand. So remember, the hand is a list, and each card is going to be one element in this list. So the length of this hand list tells us how many cards we have. So the length of our hand, if that is equal to 2, so if we have 2 cards in our hand and our score is 21, that means we have a blackjack. So if that's the case, we're going to return true. Oh, and we need to capitalize the true, so like this. Else, we're going to return false. So we're just making a little check for blackjack here. Do we have a score of 21? And do we have 2 cards in our hand? If yes, we're going to return true. Otherwise, we're going to return false. Just like this. Okay. So we can even implement that before this while loop here. And we can first check if, and then if player 1 dot has blackjack. So before we even start asking the player if they want cards, if they have a blackjack, then we don't even need to ask them for cards. So if player 1 has blackjack, so technically we can make this equals equals true, like this. But we can even take this out, and we can just say if player 1 has blackjack. And so this gives us a true value, and if true is always going to be executed. So if we have an if true, that's always going to be executed. So we don't even need to check if it's equal to true. It's kind of similar to the infinite loops that we use. So for example, like this, while true, we can technically put in while true equals true, but we don't have to. And it's the same thing with these if statements. We can put in while some condition equals true, but we can also just put in if true, and that would work too. So this has blackjack is either going to return true or false, And if it's true, this if statement is going to be executed. If not, well, we're not going to execute it then. So if our player 1 has blackjack, and if our house, so now we need to check, does the house have a blackjack or not? If house dot has blackjack, well, then we don't really do anything. So what happens? Well, we return all the money to the player. So it's kind of a draw. So we should probably also consider that in one of our functions up here. So right now we only have the option of a win and a bet, but we should also implement a draw just in case. So we're going to create another method up here, and that's going to be a draw. So we can either win or draw. So we can draw if our cards are equal. So if we both have 17 or if we both have a blackjack, for example. So we're going to define a draw to be self. So we're just taking in the self parameter here. And so if it's a draw, then our self.money, we're just going to get our bet back. So our self.money is going to be plus equal to the self.bet. And the self.bet is going to be equal to 0. So we just kind of transfer our bet back to our money. So nothing happens. We get the original money that we bet back, but we don't get anything else. So we're going to use this, and we're going to say if the player 1 has a blackjack, and if the house has blackjack, then we do player 1 dot draw. So it's a draw, and the player just kind of gets their money back that they bet. Else, we say player 1 dot win, and we have to put in the result, and so the result is going to be true. So if the player has a blackjack and the house has a blackjack, it's a draw, which gives the player back their money, gives the player back their original bet. Otherwise, it's a win for the player. So if we put in true here, we see that we already accounted for the blackjack case here. So this is all being done in here, and we don't really have to consider the different winnings based on a blackjack or not. So that's really nice that we can do that, and we can just say, so if the house does not have a blackjack, so the else statement, then the player 1 is going to win. Yeah. So this is our first else statement, and now what we can do actually is we can take this whole loop and everything, and we can put that in an else statement. So else, and we're going to take all of this, and we're just going to comment it over. So what we're doing now is first we're checking if the player has a blackjack, and if they do, then we check if the house has a blackjack, and if they both have a blackjack, the player 1 gets their bet back. Otherwise, the player 1 wins. And if the player 1 does not have a blackjack, we're going to start with this looping procedure here. So if the player 1 score, or while the player 1 scores under 21, we're going to continuously ask them if they want another card, like this. And yeah, and then we already built this out, so we kind of have this whole situation panned out here, where the player draws their cards, so we don't need to worry about this much more. The next thing that we can do is we can now make the house draw their cards. So and now we need to define a condition. How long does the house draw cards for? So let's say the house draws until they have a score of at least 16. So while the house's score, while the house dot score is less than 16, the house is going to draw a card. So how are we going to do that? Well, similar to how the player 1 drew a card, but we don't ask for input or anything, we're just going to do house dot hit, and we're going to take the top deck off our card deck, so card deck dot pop, and then open and close parentheses, because our pop, we don't actually see it. Our pop is a method that's part of this list here. So it's not an attribute, it's a method that we have to call. And so that's why we have to put these parentheses here. So what we're doing here is, first we check if the player has a blackjack. If they do, Then we check if the house is a blackjack. If the house also has a blackjack, then the player just gets their bet back and doesn't win anything. Otherwise, the player 1 wins, and we accounted for the blackjack situation already in here. So yeah, that kind of takes care of the blackjack situation. Otherwise, we continue to ask the player while they have less than 21 if they want another card. If they do, they get another card, and if they don't want another card, or if they go over or equal to 21, then we're also not going to give them any more cards. So this is going to happen until they either have a score of 21 or above, or they say they don't want another card. And after that happens, we kind of finish this loop, and then we go into this loop here, and then we check, well, while the house has a score that's less than 16, the house is going to draw some cards. Cool. So let's just run this and see where we're at right now, and then we can continue. So if we run this, first we see our deck here, and this is after 4 cards have been drawn. So what is the next thing we see? We see the print house. So we call the print house function that we defined on the house. So that's what we defined up here. Maybe we can just make an extra indent or extra new line here. And what this gives us is the house's cards, but one of them is blocked out, so their first one's blocked out. And then let's see, what's the next thing we see? The next thing we see is the player 1. So let's see, what do we have right here? We see our player 1, and we check, do we have a blackjack? Well, we don't, so we go into the else statement, and now while our score is less than 21, so we should be asked for a card. So what we forgot to do is we don't have the open and close parentheses here, which is kind of what we need because this is a method and this is not an attribute. So we need to have the open and close parentheses here, and then it's going to check for house blackjack. So similar like for the pop here, we need the open and close parentheses. We also need it here for the house blackjack because it's a method. It's not an attribute, like bet is an attribute. Has blackjack as a method, so we need these open and close parentheses here to be able to call it, or else we don't really know what we're talking about. So if we run it again, now we see, well, we get a kind of new shuffled card deck. This is what the house has right now. Oh, it looks very similar to above. What we have right now is a king and a 10. Do we want to draw another card? Probably not, so we're going to say no. And so the house has a score of 18. So we win, but we didn't account for that yet. So maybe we should account for that. And we didn't see it now, but maybe we also just want to print what the house has every time they kind of draw. So we're going to print out the house here too, and so we get to see what they have every time they draw. So that would be pretty nice too. So that's just kind of lets us see the house draw card by card. Okay, actually we can put this on top because we're printing the house out at the very end too. So we can just print out the house here. It's not going to make a difference. The only difference that we're going to see here is either we see the house's hand after they drew a card or before, but we'll continue to see it anyway. And if they get over or equal to 16, then we're going to see it down here anyway. So it doesn't really make much of a difference. So we can just run it one more time. Hopefully we get to see the house actually draw some cards this time. So this time, do we want to draw another card? Yes, we do. We're at 19 now. So let's not draw another card. And here we see the house drew another card. So this is the first thing that the house started off with. So their crossed off number was a 10. So their original score was 12, and now we see them draw another card, and now they have 20. And now also the house stops drawing cards. And so what do we need to do here? Well, we need to check who has won. So that's the next thing that we're going to need to do. We need to check if we won, or if the house won, or if it's a draw. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's just make it really simple, and let's just check the 3 different conditions. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check if our score is bigger than the house's score. So if player 1 dot score is greater than house dot score, then we're going to do the following. So we have to make sure that this if statement is after this while loop. Otherwise, we may be in the situation that we win while the house is still drawing cards, and we win every time the house draws a card, until maybe they actually get higher than we do. So if the player 1's score is greater than the house's score, what are we going to do? Well, the player 1 is going to win true. So if our player 1 score is greater than the house score, we're going to win, except if we go over 21. So maybe we should even account for that first. First we check, did we lose? Did we go over 21? And if we didn't, then we can check all these situations. So first maybe let's check if player 1 dot score, if we're greater than 21, well then we need to check for two situations again. Either the house also has greater than 21, in which case nothing happens, it's a draw, or the house has less than or equal to 21, in which case we lose. So if our score is greater than 21, and here, so now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check if the house's score is bigger than 21. So if the house's score is bigger than 21, then we're going to draw. So player 1 dot draw. So what are we checking here? We're checking first if our score is bigger than 21. If it is, then we check, does the house also have over 21? So did we both kind of bust? Did we go over 21? If we did, then it's a draw. Else, now if we go over 21 and the house didn't go over 21, then player 1 dot win is false. So we lost. So if we go over, we best case scenario draw. Otherwise, tough luck for us. Then we lose. So this is our first if statement. So we checked if we're over 21. And now we're going to do an else if rather than an if. So if we're not over 21, we're going to continue on with this, since we don't want to check for this in case we go over 21. So what are we going to do now? So if our player 1 dot score is bigger than our house dot score, then we win. So now we don't need to check for this bigger than 21 situation anymore. If our player score is not bigger than 21, but our score is bigger than the house's, that means we win. So we didn't lose because we didn't go over 21, and if our score is bigger than the house, then we win. So not much more to do here. So elif, now we need to check, maybe is our score equal to the house's score? So we're just going to go in order. Else if player 1 dot score is equal to the house's score, house dot score like this, then we're going to have a draw. So, and we also need this indented like this. So this all needs to be in the same line here, in the same if statement. So if our scores are equal, then we're going to say player 1 dot draw like this. The last thing that we're going to need to check is, again, it auto indents, which is not nice here. So first we check, did we go over 21? If we didn't, then we check, did we win against the house? And if we didn't, then we check, do we have the same score as the house? And if all of this is false, that must mean our score is less than the house. So else, well, what happens? So if our score is less than the house, there is still one way that we can win, and that's if the house went over 21. So else, now let's check our last hope and see maybe the house went over 21. So else if the house dot score, and we need an if statement here, if the house dot score is greater than 21, then we also win. So why do we win? So player 1 dot win is true. Why do we win? So if the house goes over 21, that means they lost. And we never really truly checked for this. We only always checked our score. And so there's still this one situation left where our score is lower than the house's score, but it could be that we have a 21, for example, and the house has a 22. And so if the house goes over 21, that means we still win. And we could have a 2, for example, and the house has a 22, and we'd still win because the house went over 21. So if the house's score is greater than 21, then we win. And otherwise, unfortunately, we lose because there's no other situation left. So our win is false, not true. False like this. So why can it be equal here? Well, it's because we already checked for if they're equal before. So if our score isn't bigger than the house, and if our score is not equal to the house, then our last hope is that the house went over 21. If they did, great, we win. Otherwise, we lost, so our win is false. So this should kind of account for all situations. And maybe at the very end, let's just also print out our money. So let's go in here and let's print out player1 dot money. So yeah, let's see that, and let's run our code. And what do we have here? So someone got a 21. Looks like we got a 21. And our money is still 100. Why is that? That's because we didn't bet anything. So everything seems to work. We got a 21. This was executed. We skipped over all of this. The house didn't draw any cards. Great, so that all worked. Unfortunately for us, we didn't bet any money, so our money didn't change. Yikes. So maybe let's just implement this bet in the very beginning here. So before we even see anything, we're gonna have the bet, and now we're gonna ask the user to input their bet. So bet is going to be equal to, and now we're gonna ask the user to input their bet. Input, and we're gonna prompt them with, please enter your bet, like this. And well, maybe we put a colon here and a space to have some extra formatting. So, and let's put this on a new line just so that we can see it better. What we see here is we have an input, and we ask the user to please enter their bet. And we save their bet in a variable called bet. One more thing we need to do is we need to turn this into an integer, because otherwise we get it as a string. So like a word pretty much in quotation marks. We can't do a lot with that because that's not a number, that's a word. So we need to turn this into an integer. Yeah, so they're gonna need to enter their bet. And then we can kind of continue and do everything. So let's do that. Let's run it again one more time. And now we're being asked to bet some money, so let's bet 20. And well, we got an ace and a queen, so we got a blackjack. That's great. Oh dear, we forgot to actually place our bet. So we asked for the bet, but we didn't place our bet. So we're having really bad luck right now. So we need to go into our player, and we actually need to place the bet using bet money. So we need to go into player 1, and then we need to go here into bet money, and we're going to put in the amount, which is going to be the bet. So this is what we saved in this variable, and that's what we're putting in here. So on player 1, we're going to bet money, and the amount that we're going to bet is the amount that the player put in before. So let's run this one more time. Please enter your bet. We're going to bet 20. Well, obviously this time we didn't get blackjack, even though we got it the last 2 times. That's really tough luck for us. Anyway, we've got a score of 7 now. Let's draw some more cards. Yes, we want another card. Now we're at 17. Let's leave that. And the computer got 18. So the computer won this time against us. Let's play one more time. So let's enter our bet again. Well, double or nothing, so we're going to go in for 40 right now. We've got 18. That's pretty good. So let's stay with 18. Looks like the computer got 17. So we actually won that round. Good. Great for us. So nice. Yeah. So we've kind of have like this working blackjack game now. We have the player that's asking. So we're asking the player for a bet. Then we're checking if they have a blackjack. If they don't, we continuously ask them if they want cards. If they don't, then it's the house's turn to draw. And then we check all the situations like this. And then we kind of print out the results. Cool. So we're almost done. Maybe one more thing that we can do is we can put all of this into a loop, and we can take care of shuffling, and we can also use the play function. Or the play method rather, that we implemented for the player. So that's just 2 more things that we're going to do now to make it really complete. But what we kind of see now is that we can play one round, and sure, we can start over every round, but the point of Blackjack is also that some cards kind of, the deck gets smaller, so some cards kind of go out. So we don't want to start with a full deck every time. We want the deck to kind of get smaller and smaller until it's too small, and then it gets reshuffled. So that's the last thing that we're going to want to implement. So what are we going to do? We're just going to make an infinite loop. We're going to say while true. So this is just going to go on forever and ever, and that's okay. And now what we need to do is we need to indent all of this. So all of this is going to be inside of our loop. So we're just going to indent everything. So all we're doing right now is we're just kind of repeating this over and over and over again. And the first thing that we need to do before we even ask for the bet is we should probably check if the deck needs shuffling. So the first thing that we do before anything is let's just check, does our deck have enough cards? So and now what is the condition for having enough cards? Well, the condition for having enough cards should be that, well, let's say we have no less than 20 cards. So if our card deck, now since our card deck is a list like this, to check how many cards we have, we can look at the length of the card deck, or the len of the card deck, so the length. So the length gives us how many elements we have inside, and since each element is a card, that's also going to give us how many cards we have inside. So if the length of our card deck, so if the number of cards in our card deck is less than 20, what we're going to do is we're just going to completely reshuffle. So our card deck is going to be equal to create deck function like this. So what do? Well, we kind of don't really shuffle the deck back together. Kind of what we do is we just throw away the rest of those cards and we just get a completely new shuffle deck. So we don't really, take these remaining cards, we don't shuffle them. We don't do the typical Blackjack thing that's kind of like a simple shuffle, so you just shuffle it a little bit, and sometimes cards kind of stick together and they're in the same order because it's not really a complete shuffle. We're not following that principle right now. We're just saying, well, if we have less than 20 cards, the next time we start the game, we just throw away the deck that we have right now, and we get a completely new shuffled deck. So that's kind of what we're doing here. But this also gives us back 52 cards in total. Yeah, and then we're just going to need to define the first hand and the second hand, just like we did up here. So what are we going to do? Well, let's just take our first hand and let's have that equal to, and then we're going to take the first card off the deck. So we're going to go into card deck dot pop. So we're going to take the top card off, and that's going to be the first card in our first hand, and the second card is going to just be, we're just going to pop another card off of our card deck. So what are we doing? We've created a deck with 52 cards again, and now we're just taking off the top cards one by one, and we're making those be a hand. So we're also not distributing it card by card, so not every player gets one card and then we go around again. We just say the first player gets the first two cards, and then the second player gets the second two cards, and so we're kind of going in order like that. So our first hand is going to be the first two cards of the deck. Our second hand is going to be equal to, and then we just pop another card from the card deck. So again, the pop function is just taking off the last card here, and then we just pop another one off the card deck like this. So what do we do here? We have our deck, and we're just taking the first and the second card off and we're making that the first hand. Then we're taking the third and the fourth card off, or if this isn't our first round playing, it could be that we're taking, like, say, the 12th and the 13th card off, and then the 14th and the 15th, or something like that. So, but we're just taking kind of two cards off the deck. We're going to give that to a player. We're not doing it yet, but we're going to give it to a player. And then we're taking off the next two cards, and we're going to give that to a player. So what we're going to do is we're going to give these cards to a player. So our player 1 is going to play with the first hand, and our house is going to play with the second hand. No, not second hand, like this. So we're just using the play method that we created for the player, which is up here, and our input is the new hand, and it just gives the hand, so the current hand of the player gets set to this new hand, and we recalculate the score. So that's what we're doing here. And then we can ask for the bet and do everything. Yeah, so that kind of takes care of that. That takes care of reshuffling the deck if we have less than 20 cards. And we can also continuously play and just kind of get dealt out new cards. Maybe one thing that we should do before we start this is we can just make our card deck be equal to create deck again, just because we have we created a deck here, then we're putting the top 2 cards into the first hand and the third and the fourth card into the second hand. We're giving the first hand to the player, so we're initiating the player with the first hand, we're initiating the house with the second hand, and then we're actually going to redistribute the hands. So yeah, I mean, there's a different way to do that, but since we already have a program, we don't really need to change it. All we have to do is just kind of recreate our deck so that we get back to 52 cards, and then when we redistribute the hands and everything will be reset anyway. And then after that, we don't really have to worry about anything anymore, because if we ever have less than 21, if we have ever less than 20 cards, it's going to be reshuffled. Otherwise, everything's just going to be overwritten. So yeah, this should all work nicely. And at the end of every round, we kind of print out our player one's money, and we print out what the house had. So let's see all of this in action. Please enter your bet. Let's start with 20. Maybe we should also stop printing this card deck, or else we can kind of cheat. Do we want another card with 10? Yes, we do. With 12, well, if I assume I didn't see this 10 here, 12 would probably be a good time to take another card. Yes. We went over 21. We got 22. We see that the house has 10. Now we're losing the money, so we go down to 80. And the house, well, actually the house continued to draw cards, so maybe that's also one more thing that we should take care of. So before the house actually draws cards, we should check if we went over 21. So maybe before the house even draws cards, we should check if our player 1.score, if it's greater than 21, then the house doesn't even need to draw, because we kind of already busted. Well, actually, no. We can let the house draw. We'll make it fair. We won't make the game too hard for us. So the house is gonna draw anyway. So we won't change that. That's gonna be okay. So now actually we can play again. We can put in another 20. This time we've got a 10 and a jack. So we got 20. We don't want to draw. Well, what happened? So we got 20. So they also had 20. So our money didn't change. We still have 80 from before. That's pretty good. So let's play again. Now we've got 14. Since we've got this ace, that can kind of get transformed, so maybe we can take another card. So we've got 21. That's great. The house has 18, so we're back to 100. Great. So this all works nicely. If you want, you can kind of create an input. If the player puts in they don't want to play anymore or something, like you can break out of this loop. That would just be an extra if statement. You can also take away printing this card deck here so that we don't actually see the deck the whole time. Like this. Yeah, and then maybe let's just kind of completely run it one more time until we reshuffle our deck. So actually let's continue to print our card deck just for a little bit, just so that long enough so that we can see how our card deck's going to go down, and then we should see it getting reshuffled. So let's just continuously draw cards. And we're just going to bet 1 the whole time, and all we're waiting for is our card deck to go down like this. So we're just going to bet small amounts, and we're just kind of watching our card deck go down like this. So it's going down and down and down. Do we want another card? Yeah. So, wow, we're actually winning sometimes. That's interesting. Do we want another card? Yes. Yeah. Sure. We're at 19. Oh, I might say no this time. Oh, we lost anyway. And here we see. So here, this is our card deck before, and so we can kind of see it. It's kind of going down. It's always the same one. So we see this 9, 3, 9, 8. This is all that we have here. So these cards were all drawn last round or distributed. And now we reached under 20 cards at some point. And so now we have a completely new and reshuffled deck. So that all works nicely too. So yeah, this kind of completes our Blackjack game. You can expand on it a little bit, of course, if you like. You can kind of add more features, more statements. You can add more players even if you like. And to take care of the rounds, you can use arrays. So you can put all the players into an array, for example, and you can use that to take care of having each player individually bet and stuff. So you can kind of use a for in loop to go through the arrays of the players one by one, and for each element you can kind of execute this. So you would just put an extra for in loop on top of this while inside this else statement, for example. And so there you can kind of create a list of players, and you can just loop through each of the players and ask them if they want more cards or not. So you can add each of those extra features. But yeah, so this is a working Blackjack game that we created. So that's really cool. We kind of combined all the skills that we've gathered so far. We used a little bit of everything, and we've created our first long project. So this is the first kind of long project that we did, but it's a really cool working game. That's kind of fun to play. Maybe one more thing that you'd like to do when you actually play this is take out this card deck, just so that you don't see all the cards that are coming, or else that's kind of cheating. Yeah, but otherwise, have fun with it.